Thank you, Peter, and thanks everybody for being here this morning. As Peter said, we can't do what we do without you and without your input, your guidance as to what it is you need in terms of legislation, in terms of policy, what works for your companies and doesn't work for your companies, what are the fatal flaws in proposals that may be well-intended, and then what are the important missing pieces that are essential if in fact a policy is going to work. And as Peter said, we do that with our state partners. And this is your chance, for those of you who aren't in some of these states, to see them live and in person. They're actually on the ground. These are people that are essential to our operations, and we're really grateful for their participation and coordination. I'll do a quick introductions of everyone, and then we're going to go into the overview of the activities in the states, and each of them will talk about their states. But going alphabet or middle as we down the line, Mike Martone is our lobbyist in Connecticut. He's with the firm Murtha, Cullina. Mike has been with us for a few years, essential to us knowing what is happening in Connecticut and making sure we're talking to the right people there. So Mike will give us an overview of what's happening in Connecticut this year. To Mike's left is Olivia Campbell Andersen from Rhode, Vermont, sometimes the other Rev, but the first Rev, Renewable Energy, Vermont.
The functioning Rev.
In case you missed that, she said the functioning Rev. We love our friends in New York, so. There has been a lot happening in Vermont this year. Again, a lot of on the ground. And sometimes Vermont is like the leading edge for us, and that there is a lot of deployment of solar and renewables, and some of the challenges as you see more and more infrastructure out there that we're facing. You'll see some themes resurfacing this morning, siting being one of them. Then to Olivia's left is Kate Epsen, the recently departed executive director of the New Hampshire Sustainable Energy Association and founder of the New Hampshire Clean Tech Council. She is remaining on the NHSEA board, and I assume NHCTC. But the new executive director just hired is a woman named Madeline. We look forward to working with her. But Kate agreed to come and have this be her sort of finale, her reprise, to come and do an overview of this legislative session, which she saw through to the end. Then next to Kate is a man who needs no introduction, Dan Bosley. Dan is NECEC's Government Relations Executive. He leads our activities at the legislature in Massachusetts, but he also is dispatched to almost all of the other states. So he's a presence in Maine, in Connecticut. He's gone in Vermont. Sometimes that's our farthest turn. Rhode Island, and so very important person to the success of NECEC. And then to Dan's left is Melissa Winne, the new executive director of E2 Tech. Folks may recall Jeff Marks from previous years. Melissa has stepped into his shoes and done a great job seeing us through the end of this year's, seeing us through this whole legislative session. And we had a great Maine Clean Energy Day, made some progress, and we're looking forward to more progress in the future. And then to my immediate left, another person who needs no introduction, or maybe you've just talked with him on the phone, is Jamie Dickerson, who is our policy analyst and our Rhode Island coordinator. And frankly, we would not be here today if it were not for Jamie, who shepherds everything, makes sure that we're on track, answers all of your questions. I know he's the frontline person that many of you call, and very appreciative of and grateful for his hard work and his insight and making sure the trains run on time. So now I'm going to turn to unveil the scorecard. So there were some paper copies of the scorecard available because we know that you can't read all the words up here. So we might share those around. But this is what this year looked like. So I was on the train this morning and showed it to a friend I ran into and said, "What's your impression?" She said, "Pretty good." I think as we just come off the immediacy of the end of the mass session and the challenges, which a week ago we thought this entire column in the middle might have been gray for no action, as it was last year. We were feeling a little bit, oh my God, all the stuff we didn't get. But in fact, we did really well in Massachusetts overall. Didn't get one key thing, didn't get as much as we wanted on some other items. Dan will go into that. But I think what you'll see from the yellow here is it's sort of a mixed year. The challenges of net metering and what comes next, and what future incentive programs look like, are some the hazards of our success. We've seen a tremendous growth in solar and distributed resources, and the question now is, what does the next level of incentives look like? Jamie will talk a little bit about the fact that we've already sold out the REG program in Rhode Island. It opened in April, it's closed already. Incentives will be lower next year, but maybe that's because they don't need to be as high. But those are some of the challenges, and this is one of the places where getting it right is really important, because sometimes as policymakers adjust these programs, they can introduce challenges that cannot be overcome. I think some of the other themes that we saw that are sort of unresolved still relate to the siting of renewables. Should there be different siting standards for renewables than other kinds of development? How do you preserve farmland and forest land, and how do you have compatible uses of land? Challenges that were not resolved in most of our states but are a continuing part of the conversation. I think our two red blocks here are Maine and Rhode Island. Yet again, Maine passed that solar bill and couldn't override the governor's veto. So we're looking forward to next year in Maine where we might have a different dynamic. And in Rhode Island, again, I think we wanted to tweak that renewable energy growth bill so we could make some more capacity available so it wouldn't sell out so quickly, and couldn't quite get that done. But I think the realities of this year will give us impetus for addressing that next year. So here's an overall look. I'm not going to get into the details here. I'm going to let our panelists do that. And we're going to go alphabetically, so start with you, Mike. And I think they suggested using the lab.
Yeah, alphabetically by state.
Alphabetically by state.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Again, my name is Mike Martone. I am the Connecticut lobbyist for NECEC. I work for Boston and Hartford law firm Murtha, Cullina, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. I can't tell you how much fun it is to work with Jamie and Peter and Janet and the team. We have a great group, and it's been a lot of fun over the last few years. So unlike Dan, we've been out of session for a couple of months. It was our short session, ended May 5th rather. But we did get, for better or worse, some legislation was passed. So I'm going to get into that and also talk a little bit about what didn't pass this year. So first thing I want to talk about is an act concerning climate change planning and resiliency. And I'm going to skip the coastal resiliency part and just move into the climate change. So current law requires that a 10% reduction of the 1990 greenhouse gas emissions be done by the year 2020, and 80% of the 2001 emissions by 2050. This bill put an interim step of 45% of the 2001 emissions reduction by the year 2030. It also requires that the integrated resource plan, which DEEP and the EDCs do every 2 years, consider not only reducing energy rates, but factor into greenhouse gas emissions in the most cost-effective way. It changes the comprehensive energy strategy to the comprehensive climate and energy strategy, and requires that it be done every 4 years instead of 3, although those of you that were involved in the comprehensive energy strategy, I don't think there's going to be much of a difference, because the 3-year strategy actually took 4 years to implement anyhow. But this has to be updated to account for the state's new greenhouse gas strategy and not just including energy. It also sets up a Connecticut Council on Climate Change, which is charged with coordinating the efforts on greenhouse gas emission among the business, state, municipal, and NGOs. They're required to meet twice a year, and the members will include the Purity Chair, commissioners of DOT, DAS, DEEP, and others, the CEO of the Green Bank, and business and industry. So now I'd like to move to Public Act 1850, which is better known as the notorious Senate Bill 9, which was hotly contested throughout the year. It's an act concerning Connecticut's energy future, and it's Connecticut's effort to move into sort of the next generation of clean energy as other as other states around us have done. It was the most important bill of this session, and arguably the most important clean energy bill since Public Act 1180 was enacted 7 years ago. I took the liberty of quoting Otto von Bismarck last year, and I'm going to do so again. And you know, the famous quote that if you like to see, if you enjoy sausage or legislation, you're better off not seeing either one being made, and that was certainly true in this one. I'll get into that in a second. But what happened with this, it was a very controversial bill, hotly contested from beginning to end. I don't think anybody was, including legislators that voted for it, were happy with the final package. It pitted folks that are normally on the same side and legislators that are normally on the same side of the bill against each other. And really it came down, there were two components, I think, that caused the issues. There was a netting time, particularly residential, and also the fact that the program wasn't as robust as people would have liked it to be. So it came down to, do we want to pass something this year, work on it next year, or do we want to scuttle this, extend the ZREC LREC program for a year, and figure it out next year? And what ended up happening, the bill ended up passing. And part of the bill is, a docket needs to be open, Pura needs to open a docket by September 1st of this year, and one of the things they need to do is select the netting time between real time, 1 day, or a fraction of a day, which is still going to be very problematic as we move forward. So let me get just for a couple of minutes, get into the sausage and law piece of this bill. Again, most important bill probably in the last 7 years. Monday before the very end of session, it's a Senate bill. It comes up on the Senate floor. It got all of 5 minutes of discussion, maybe 10 at the outset. It was voted on 29 to 3. Again, no discussion, no questions, no concerns. 29 to 3 goes down to the House. So that Tuesday, opponents and supporters of the bill were buttonholing legislators. It was, chaotic last couple of days of the session, and just kept working legislators and working them. And a deal was struck with the opponents of the bill. And Jonathan Steinberg, who many of you know is a friend of clean energy, the deal was that he would call an amendment which would propose weekly net metering for residential, and would also double the size of the proposal to 170 megawatts. He would speak on the bill, on the amendment, withdraw it, and then there'd be a vote on the bill. What happened was at 3 in the morning, the bill was called. He calls the amendment, speaks on it, and before he had a chance to withdraw it, the speaker called the bill, called the amendment, and lo and behold, the amendment passed. So it was like, okay, now what do? This isn't going according to script. So there was a 20-minute recess, and they got with the parliamentarians and decided that he would ask to reconsider the vote, which he did, and then ask to withdraw the amendment, which he did. And the bill then went on to pass by a 100 to 45 vote at about 3:20 in a.m. on the last day of the session. We all wearily left and tried to get a couple hours sleep before coming back. So what does the bill do after all the sausage is made? It increases, or good thing, increases the RPS gradually to 40% by the year 2000. It extends the ZREC LREC program an additional year. As a
2030.
I'm sorry, 2030.
You said 2000.
Oh, sorry, 2030.
So one thing I'll say to folks, the slides are going to be available on our website. So, but yes.
Okay, let me start. It increases the RPS to 40% by year 2030. It extends the ZREC LREC program as an additional year as a bridge to the new tariff program. And again, it requires that PURA establish a docket by September 1st of this year to implement the tariff. There's an interim docket going on right now, which is kind of asking for industry input, which will lead them to the docket on September, that will come out on September 1st or earlier. It sets an annual megawatt cap of 85 megawatts, 10 slated for fuel cells, 50 for zero emission, and 25 megawatts for shared clean energy. It sunsets the residential net metering program with the RCIP, the Residential Solar Investment Program. Target of 3,300 megawatts is met. That's likely to be the year 2020. And in the tariff that's going to be established, PURA needs to set the tariff rate of the netting period, which can only be real-time, 1 day, or a fraction of a day. And it continues to be a major sticking point for developers. We'll also be given, on the residential side, the option of a buy-all, sell-all, or net import. And there's no limit on the residential side. It creates a state policy to reduce energy consumption by 1.6 million BTUs annually from the year 2020 through 2025, and allows DEEP to solicit proposals from run-of-the-river hydro, fuel cells, offshore wind, or anaerobic digestion, which is equal to 6% of the total load, which is up from 4% right now. And Dave Giordano, who's in the audience, and others in the fuel cell industry lobbied very hard for that, and we're successful. In the budget, the energy efficiency folks got a bit of a break. You'll recall last year in the state budget there was a $127 million raid of the energy efficiency funds. Well, the legislature saw fit to put back $10 million in the fiscal year 2000 budget. And that concludes it for the bills that passed, and I'll just talk quickly on the bills that failed. An act concerning the zoning of solar farms would have taken the siting council out of the picture and put solar under the auspices of local zoning, which of course just really goes against what the siting council is charged to do. An act repealing the commercial solar tax exemption, that was pushed by the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities early on. It never got out of committee. It may come up, may or may not come up again next year. There was a bill that would have required a decommissioning bond on grid-scale solar projects, and I will give the industry credit for this. The argument that we made to legislators was that this should be done on a developer-landowner basis. It should be a negotiated issue versus something that the legislature sticks its nose into. And finally, an act concerning municipal and state competitive procurement of electricity that was put forward by a Massachusetts nonprofit. It was opposed by the state, feeling that this would supersede state procurement regulations. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be around, obviously, to answer any questions.
Mike, any thoughts about next year?
Well, next year, I mean, obviously, I think Senate Bill 9 has to be improved. Hard to tell what's going to happen next year, because we have over 30 new legislators coming forward. Lonnie Reed, who was a big champion for energy and co-chair of the Energy Committee for many, many years, did not seek re-election. There are 5 Republicans running for governor. There are 2, an independent and 2 Democrats. There's a primary on August 14th. There's a whole lot of moving parts, and we're going to have a whole lot of new people. So, I mean, I think I look at that as a good thing. I mean, we're going to have an opportunity to educate some new folks and on both the legislative and administrative side.
Thank you very much. So thanks, Mike. We're going to run through all of the states. We're going to run through all of the states. We're going to run through all of the states, and then we will come back around. So, Melissa, Maine.
All right, so Director of ET Tech. We are a business and economic development organization based in Portland, Maine. I'm going to give a quick recap. So this is the second session of the 128th legislature. This was a short session that pulled into a special session. I'm going to go through, there were a lot of bills carried over from the first session, including a lot of energy bills, so I'm going to highlight a few of them. Now, I just also like to note that it's been, as Janet pointed out, a challenging few sessions. I have here our governor has vetoed more bills than all Maine governors since 1917 combined. So that's around 642 when this article was out. So it's been a challenge for sure. All right, so I'm going to start with some Reggie bills. So the first is LD 1515. This would have established a ceiling on energy efficiency spending from Reggie Trust Fund. So in Maine, the Reggie funding goes to Efficiency Maine. And this was going to transfer some of that funding directly to energy-intensive businesses and ratepayers. And this one died in committee. So I'll skip that one in detail. The next was LD 1657. So this extended Maine's participation in Reggie through 2030. And it set the annual carbon dioxide emission budget to reflect the approval of the 2.5% annual decline from 2020 to 2030, and will maintain the 2% decline until 2020. This was passed unanimously by the legislature and became law without the governor's signature. And just for a little overview of the impact of Reggie funding, so the Natural Resources Council of Maine reported that between 2012 and 2017, Efficiency Maine used $54 million in Reggie funds to leverage $88 million in private investment, and that achieved $277 million in energy savings for Maine homes and businesses. So it's been a really successful program, and we're happy to see that that's continuing. All right, so moving into wind permitting, just a little bit of background information to start on this one. So in January, Governor LePage issued an executive order which imposed a moratorium on new wind energy projects in western and coastal Maine. This did not include offshore. And this executive order also established a secretive commission to study how wind turbines impact the state's tourism economy. I can't make it up.
That word was in the legislation.
Secretive, yeah. So it's private, I think, was the word that was used. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But on top of that executive order, there was also a governor's bill. So this is LD 1810. And kind of followed on the executive order in that it redefined what expedited permitting areas were included. So I think it was in 2008, there was a bill that established expedited wind permitting areas to encourage wind energy development in western and northern Maine. And so this redefined that area to a much smaller portion in eastern Aroostook County, way up north in the state. It also changed the visual impact assessment from an 8-mile requirement to 40 miles. So this bill died in session, but the executive order that I mentioned to start is still active. A couple groups, the Conservation Law Foundation and Maine Renewable Energy Association, filed a lawsuit questioning the constitutionality of that executive order. But just this past week, a judge dismissed that, saying that there's been no proof of harm to current projects. However, it's still subject to challenge by a developer that can now be affected. So see how that plays out. And then that private commission is in fact meeting. There are 15 members. We don't know who it is. They are collecting public comment until August 15th. So that's on economic impact of wind development in Maine. Potential impact on the tourism industry is really the focus of the commission. So if you're interested in providing public comment, I can send that information to the NECEC team, and they can direct you to how to submit that.
Do we have to sign the comments?
Yes. The comments can be anonymous. All right, moving into the next slide. So this is microgrid development. So this is LD 257. This established a measure for municipalities to work with utilities in establishing microgrids. This included practices in demand management, storage, generation, and running loads that are capable of operating in parallel or independent from the grid. This passed both the House and Senate, was vetoed by the governor, and the veto was sustained, so it died. But the fact that it made it through both the House and Senate is promising for future microgrid legislation in the upcoming sessions. And just a quick highlight of something that's going on in Maine in terms of microgrids you may have seen in some articles recently. Idaho is working on a microgrid system, so islands are at the forefront of some of the need for microgrids. They have a cable currently that's connecting them to the mainline grid that needs to be replaced. So they did an economic analysis and determined that out of wind, diesel, replacing the cable, the best option for them was solar generation. So using that in combination with battery storage and hot water and heat pump storage to develop a microgrid system. So that'll be a really fun project to watch. Another bill, this was presented by Senate President Thibodeau, it was LD 1741, relatively broad in the language, but it would establish a commission to study economic, environmental, and energy benefits of energy storage. Maine, this was a short session. As I mentioned, it went into a special session, and there were some bills that were carried into that session that weren't brought up, so it didn't make it through, but seemed to have some interest and potential for future sessions. So keep an eye on that. And then, as Janet mentioned, the last one I'll talk about here is LD 1444. This was a combination of a few different solar bills. The three pieces that it primarily was going to do was maintain a declining rate for net metering, so that's a 10% annual decrease in the credit. It's going to increase, currently we have a cap in Maine for the number of participants for community solar. It's at 9, so that would going to increase that to 50. And it was also going to remove the PUC's gross metering provision. It passed House and Senate with 2/3 majority, vetoed by the governor, and failed to override by 2 votes. There were some legislators that switched their vote. So we will then carry on with the PUC ruling, and the main piece of that's a struggle is that it maintains gross metering. So in essence, there's a T&D fee that can be charged for electricity that's produced on your house and used in your house, rather than the net metering credit for the net electricity that you're producing. And that requires a new meter to be put on every entity that's generating solar. So not super supportive of solar development in the state. It also maintains that annual decrease in the net metering rate. This is just a quick look ahead. We have a big election year, primarily focused on the gubernatorial candidates. So we do have a Democrat, Republican, and 2 independents after the primaries. I will put a plug out there. E2 Tech is holding a gubernatorial debate focused on energy, environmental, and economic development issues on September 13th, just to ensure that their ideologies and platforms are out there on energy and environmental issues primarily. So we'll have an ask out to our members to provide some questions that they're interested in asking, and again, that'll be September 13th up in Portland. We also have our 1st congressional district, 2nd congressional district, and a U.S. Senate seat up for some of the larger election pieces. So I'll leave that there, and we have the questions.
Thanks, Melissa. So now Dan Bosley's up from Massachusetts, and we're trying to keep each of the presentations to 8 to 10 minutes, so we leave time for questions at the end.
Why do you feel you need to tell me?
I don't know why I have to say that now.
I have to mic myself up. Is there
but look at
is there
this
makeup?
man. What did you pay these people off? There's time to details of Massachusetts.
I get my time too.
Okay.
So I got the mic on. Is there makeup?
Yes. Makeup is good.
My nose shiny.
Yeah.
As I was listening to this, as I was listening to Melissa, I was thinking to myself, I'm really going to miss LePage. Who are we going to talk about. Who does he think he is? Well, he is governor. He thinks he's Dean Wormer. He's got the entire industry on double secret probation. And who knew he was a Birds fan? I can see for miles and miles. Yeah, I'm going to change that. Okay. I'm going to go through this very quickly.
Dan's a little punchy.
No, this is kind of me. I'm going to go through this. Unlike other states, or unlike what we used to do, which is we'd file a bill and you'd pass it on that meter, and you'd pass it on storage, you'd pass it on something else. Everything is jammed in one bill now, a comprehensive bill. We were told this year we weren't going to do a comprehensive bill, but it's semi-comprehensive because it's only the only one bill we did. But I want to talk about a couple of things first. And the first is, this slide here, there were over 175 bills that were passed this year, and then energy-related hearings weren't just in the
They weren't passed, they were raised, they were
filed, this year, yeah, excuse me. The energy-related hearings weren't just in the TUE committee. There were bills on solar tax that was in revenue. There were other bills that were heard or other studies that were done. We participated in all of these, and you can see the topics on the bottom of this page. This isn't unique to us. Everyone up here does this. They have literally dozens, and in some cases hundreds, of meetings with legislators during the year to try to shepherd something out, either one bill or a bunch of bills. And so that's what happened this year in Massachusetts. Before I get into the bill that was passed, I want to mention actually two bond issues, because there were things that happened in other committees. And the first one is the environmental bond. It authorized $211 million to be spent on climate programs. State hazard mitigation. They put a definition of hazard in there. A hazard to be mitigated. A hazard is anything that is man-made that poses a long-term risk. Climate adaptation, and then resilient land conservation. There's a whole bunch of programs that are in this bond issue. And just to give you an idea, there's $10 million in the data program line item for a clearinghouse to monitor, to project, to collate information so that we can do things in a more intelligent way. There's $5 million for fleet electrification. For our regional transit authorities, there's $15 million for EV, mostly for charge stations around the state. We need an infrastructure. So you can see that all of these programs add up to $211 million. Two other ones that I just want to mention is that there is a $500,000 program at UMass Amherst to look at reducing the cost of liquid flow batteries. And there's, I just found this interesting, there's $15 million to combat coastal flooding in Winne. So I think that's good. I think somebody gets it. Then there's not a slide up here for this, but last night I was looking at the economic development bond that passed. The session ended at midnight. And about 1:15 a.m. they were still passing bills. And one of the last bills that they passed was an economic development bill. There was a $668 million bond issue in the House. There was a $650 million bond issue in the Senate. They finally decided they couldn't come to agreement, so they glommed it all together and passed a $1.2 billion economic development bond. However, $50 million of that was a section that requires municipalities to consider, among other things, climate change and hazard mitigation. $225,000 for an applied climate coastal resilience innovation center in Barnstable. $3.5 million for a pilot program in Lowell to give 0 to 3% loans to local commercial companies to, in part, implement energy efficiency improvements. $1 million for an anaerobic digester to get rid of sludge in Greenfield. And then along Highway 62, and for those that aren't from the middle of the state, that's Clinton, Maynard, Hudson, and several other towns. I think it's 7 communities. There's a line item for $3 million to investigate, develop, refine, and build prototype vehicles utilizing non-pollution resources such as photovoltaics. And then $15 million to dredge Brayton Point in anticipation of doing some work there with offshore wind. The reason I mention those two bond issues is that if you think that it's frustrating that we have to wait until the end of the year, what you all are doing by advocating for things with the legislature is beginning to take hold. As they deliberate other bills, They are deliberating about climate change, about trying to utilize new technologies and clean energy as they go forward. The bill passed at the end of the year, and it passed actually the day before, so we have a lot of breathing space this year. I don't want to say we had a good 2 years, but we had a great 48 hours, I think, at the end of the session. And I say that, you know, the bill is a lot of people that were disappointed in it, but actually the more we look at it, the more we realize that we got a lot of our initiatives into this bill. We did not do net metering, and I'll cover that in a minute, but we did get a lot of things, and I feel happy because a month ago, I would have bet you 60-40, 70-30, we weren't going to get a bill at all. The way bills are passed, when you do a conference committee, it's you take the House bill and the Senate bill, you find areas of common interest, you park those, you put those aside, and if they're a little bit different, you can come to agreement. Then you take the areas of disagreement. This year we had a Senate bill that had 80 sections in it that was very comprehensive. We had 4 House bills that were passed that had total about 20 sections in them. And none of them were the same. So it was very difficult to get into conference and find common ground because there was no place to start. Generally, if you find 1 or 2 places to start, that will lead to other things. So it was very difficult, and at the end of the day, we were able to double the RPS to 2% annually. You'll see it goes back to 1% a year. That was an issue that the committee struggled with because a lot of the business groups said, by the time we get to 2030, we're going to have a lot of other things going on. This is going to be a drag on the system. So to bring the business groups on, they went back to 1%. Most of the people that I've talked to who have been advocates have said, well, it gives us 12 years to change this. We need to, and to tell a story. There is a Clean Peak standard in this bill. It is, it's the first in the nation to enact a bill, to adopt a bill. It has, it's to shave peaks. I'm not going to read everything that's up there. I just assume everybody could read. So I'm going to go through these rather quickly. Solar net metering. While there was no net meter cap raise, there was modified MMRC language. It was not the Senate language. The Senate changed that language at the last minute because they were worried about some of the language that was in the bill that everyone agreed to. There was a word predetermined, and we were told that has no legal standing. I think everybody knows what predetermined means, but I shouldn't assume that. I should predetermine that. So they changed that, and the language is weaker, but it will drive everybody back to the PUC. And they will, and then, you know, we'll battle this out there. It does allow for a system peak, but it will compel everybody to refile. Energy storage, they went from 200 megawatt hours to 1,000 megawatt hours for storage deployment. It canceled out the 2020 timeline, but then puts a 2025 timeline in. And it gives us a 500% increase in energy storage, which is a good thing. And there are a variety of policies that can be considered to support the achievement of this. Energy efficiency, Steve Cowell, thank you very much. He worked so hard. Steve worked so hard to get this in. The bill 1724 is the number most people know it by. They achieved agreement with everyone on this bill. It passed the House. It was not in the Senate bill. And at the end of the day, it wasn't the things that they were arguing about, and so it was up to us to all of us to make sure that they didn't forget energy efficiency, and they didn't. And it added technology. It modernizes our energy efficiency programs. It promotes fuel switching to cleaner sources. It's a great piece of this bill. And then offshore wind. I think you probably all saw the note yesterday about what offshore wind prices are coming in at. The bill effectively doubles by adding another 1,600. It allows for another 1,600. It doesn't require, but it allows for another 1,600 megawatts of wind. And then there's miscellaneous. There's an annual grid resiliency. There's heat maps. There's all sorts of things that the EDCs now have to do so that we can better plan. There's independent transmission bids for offshore wind, which gives greater flexibility and hopefully will lower prices. Feasibility studies on emergency mobile battery storage systems. So after we all leave here, I would encourage you all to go over to the registry and get your CDL license so you can be driving those batteries around for the rest of our careers. And then what got left out? Well, net metering caps. The House failed to take that up. The House did a 2% net metering cap, but they never took the bill up. It remained in second reading when they did the rest of the bills, and then they went into conference on the rest of the bills. And in talking to some of the Senate about their bill, they had no cap at all in their bill. But in talking to the Senate about this, they said, well, you know, everybody was concerned about the MMRC, they were concerned about the RPS. We really didn't hear a lot on net metering. We would assume that, yeah, well, that may be, that may not be, but what I'm saying is that's what we were told. So what it tells us is that we need to get back to the basics, and we need to tend to work in getting on that. Solar property tax, there were 2 bills that were filed this year. One of them passed the Senate. They were both held in bills in the third reading. We managed to get them stopped so that we could take a look at them. And we think it's important for us to continue to work on these bills because we don't want to have to battle this year after year after year. So we need to do something that's rational and something that needs to be handled. And then, quite frankly, as part of it, if we're going to talk about solar property taxes, we need to talk about fuel cell taxation. We need to talk about making sure that everybody's on the same plane on that. And there was a bill on fuel cell taxes that we didn't get to. It was hung up also. And once they had put the big bill out, it was apparent that everything that wasn't in there wasn't going to happen. Home energy rating scores, appliance efficiencies, there were other things, but those are the big things that were left out. For next year we've got Golden's already told us that he's been told he's coming back to the committee. We don't know, but I know that Michael Barrett said that he's got a footing this year. And for those who have worked on carbon pricing, Michael Barrett deserves a lot of credit for as far as this got. He started a conversation that has accelerated. People are now talking about carbon pricing, carbon sequestration. He passed it in the Senate, and I think it's the first place that it has passed in a legislative body, anywhere. And he's got people talking about this thing. So he deserves credit for where it is. It was clear the House wasn't going to do it. It was clear that it probably wasn't timely for them to do it right now because there were so many things that needed to be worked out. But he deserves a lot of credit for that. Senator Pacheco has said that he's already working on next year's bill. So I think that we'll have a lot to work on next year. Certainly, we have to go back to basics on net metering, on taxation. And then finally, whether it's carbon pricing or it's anything else, we need to deal with transportation. To a certain extent, electricity is the low-hanging fruit. We need to get into transportation, we need to get into buildings, we need to do some other things, and so that's all on the plate for next year. And thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and on time too, that was great. So we can have time to get from New Hampshire to Rhode Island and Vermont. So.
I'll be
Kate
quick.
Epsen.
Thanks, Jenna. All right, good morning, everyone. Great to be back for one more legislative wrap-up. Thanks for having me. So this was also the second year of a biennium for New Hampshire. And just to, I told all of you this last year, but just to remind everyone, we went into this biennium with a Republican-controlled House of 400 members, a Republican-controlled Senate with 24 members, and a Republican-controlled governor's office. So we've been gearing up for this for a while, and we had some good bills ready to go out the gate in January. The best bills that we were working on that would have really advanced some significant clean energy for New Hampshire were SB 446 and SB 321. So starting with the really good news, because it fully passed and got signed, 321 is a bill to allow you to be part of a virtual group or a group net metering project and still stay on competitive supply. And this is really helpful because it allows a lot of those larger end users who clearly shifted to competitive supply years ago and don't want to go back to also engage in local renewable energy projects through net metering. So that's great. That's moving forward. That will open up some doors. 446 was going to raise our project cap from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts for net metering. And it was going to just set the rate at the same rate projects get for up to 1 megawatt today, which is the default energy service rate, which in New Hampshire floats or changes every 6 months. And so that was great. That was really an impressive run because net metering is very contentious, like in a lot of states, especially in New Hampshire. The utilities really don't like it. And we got a bipartisan bill through. It was Republican sponsored. We got it through the 2 chambers. We got it actually to come out in a better place than it went in. And then I flew to Europe, and then it got vetoed. So that was unfortunate. It's not why, but you know, the story of the veto is, it's fairly unfortunate because, you know, the governor already had a lot of cover. You know, a lot of Republicans voted for this. It was really a bill, you know, for large businesses, municipalities, to really have a way and another tool to control their energy costs. And, you know, at no cost shifting, all of those arguments had been pretty well debunked. But, you know, really, I think this veto happened for about 5 people in one company. And I won't mention any names, but, you know, that's, all of you who work in politics, like, that's how local these relationships can get. And so there, if, you know, if we did it all over again, it probably would have gotten vetoed again, for very real reasons from these very, very few entities and individuals that have very strong relationships with our governor. That said, the Senate already has a veto override majority ready to go on override day, which is coming up in September on the 13th. The House we're still working very hard on to see if we will be able to have the 2/3 of the votes needed. So if you want to engage more in that, I will tell you how to do so at the end. So the other bill that got vetoed is a little bit more niche, but also is very important to the biomass plants in New Hampshire. This SB 365, and I'm going to go through quickly, and if you have burning questions, definitely ask me after. We had, of course, more energy efficiency and RGGI battles, as we have most every year in New Hampshire. RGGI is at status quo. That's the bottom line. We had a bill that got very close to the end to bring all those auction proceeds back into energy efficiency, but the Senate basically got word from the governor that he was going to veto it, and they kind of caved, and then they didn't pass it, so that died. We had a bill 592 that started out as a RGGI repeal bill. It got rolled back to just send all the money back to ratepayers as these embedded bill credits, because right now we do a little bit of both. Luckily that got stopped. And then this bill, SB 317, you know, it was very hard, I think, for the press to report accurately on this, so here's exactly how this works. This was a bill originally to say only the legislature can raise the systems benefit charge, and that is what funds our efficiency programs and our energy efficiency resource standard. But that got it's not great that it got passed, but it's pretty much, it's a neutralized bill at this point. So what it says was that the general court, which is the legislature, has to approve all increases in the system benefit charge going forward that is outside of the PUC order that set up the energy efficiency resource standard. So I think legally, the argument can be made that the EERS is ongoing and it's aiming to get to all cost-effective efficiency. So we will see how this plays out after this first year triennium, you know, in 2020, how that kind of legal interpretation really plays out. But the EERS is protected. So it's really, if you want to raise the SBC for other things at this point, that the general court would have to approve it. So that's good. There were a lot of RPS bills, as always. You know, there were bills to repeal it, there were bills to freeze Class 1. All of those got defeated. Any versions of these bills that got passed, like 225, 1550, they are essentially just reporting bills. So one is reporting on kind of the costs of the RPS to a ratepayer, and then one is showing in an annual report that the PUC does, kind of how all the REC transactions worked, and a little bit more granularity. So, you know, information isn't necessarily a bad thing. We all knew it wanted to be they wanted to weaponize it and, you know, make it look like the RPS was bad for ratepayers, but they've been pretty well neutralized even as passed. We had some really good bills on electric vehicles. This was kind of all throughout the time period where everybody's working on their VW settlement plans, and luckily in New Hampshire, the governor also chose to dedicate that full 15% toward electric vehicle infrastructure and charging. And so SB 517 and SB 575 are bills that set up a study commission to look at how to better deploy EV technology and infrastructure. And then 575 is a great bill that helps, direct DOT to do road signage. Like we have those little gas station pumps and the blue signs. Streamlined road signs, just like those have for EV charging off of highways. And then saying that the charging station owners cannot be designated as a public utility, meaning they can resell electricity, and that helps improve utility tariffs and kind of language around that. So if you are in the electric vehicle charging station business, New Hampshire I think is going to be ripe for much more development in that. 1763 got defeated very luckily because that was going to throw on new road usage fees for, it was this very strange bill where basically like it set this baseline for a car that got 20 miles per gallon, and then anything fluctuating off that up to a pure electric would just have to kind of pay these tiered extra fees, because there's this ongoing debate in New Hampshire, like in most places, we're losing funding from our gas tax for the roads and bridges, and so we're going to blame it on electric vehicles and hybrids, and they'll have to make up the difference, where it's obviously a much greater revenue and infrastructure problem. What's coming in 2019? One thing that's not on here that I think will come up is siting bill. New Hampshire did this big overhaul, allegedly, of their siting bill a few years ago, and then, Northern Pass happened, and I won't get into that, but everyone's like, oh, the process is broken, this isn't working, we need to redo it, so there'll probably be some bills around that. And the Governor's Office of Strategic Initiatives, which used to be the Office of Energy and Planning, came out with this revised energy strategy, and frankly, it is not a strategy, it is just a long paper about using the word cost effective with no different definition, and saying that we need to consolidate our RPS, we need to give money to nukes, and it really is not a very sophisticated paper, and hopefully it will not be taken too much to heart by policymakers, but there likely will be a bill, because there's a bill on the RPS every year to weaken it, and probably a bill now specifically to consolidate all 4 classes, include nukes and large hydro, or something of that nature. Then if the vetoes don't get overridden, those bills will come back, very likely. And then, of course, everyone likely knows in New Hampshire, every time there's a model rule change, we have to get the whole thing through the legislature instead of doing it administratively or through the Department of Environmental Services. So we're going to have a bill to implement that. And then most importantly, since I'm not the executive director anymore, we have a new executive director who's really, really great. I highly recommend you reach out to her. She's going to work with NECEC. She just started yesterday, and that is her email. So if you want to get involved also in the override in particular, definitely reach out to her. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Jamie, you're up for Rhode Island.
All right, everyone hear me all right? It's a little bit tough. All right. So, morning everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to share the proverbial stage with this impressive cast of state coordinators. I think it's pretty clear that they do some great work. They each do some great work, and they've all been really valuable partners to us at NECEC. For those who don't know me, I'm Jamie Dickerson. I'm NECEC's policy analyst. I also moonlight as our Rhode Island state coordinator. We obviously spend a lot of time down in Rhode Island on both legislative and regulatory issues. There's some really exciting stuff going on in Rhode Island with offshore wind procurements, renewable procurements, power sector transformation. We have Jonathan Schrack here from the DPUC if you'd like to talk to him about the National Grid rate case. but some really exciting things. So we came into the 2018 legislative session on the heels of what were really two landmark legislative sessions in 2016 and 17. The picture you see on the slide is Governor Raimondo signing 4 or 5 really important bills last year. And there were a handful of proposals that came into 2018 really looking to continue that legislative momentum and push it forward. But unfortunately, as you all saw on the scorecard, it was not a banner year for legislation in Rhode Island this year. And the state failed to move a number of, not seismically important bills, but positive steps in the right direction, failed to move those forward. And I really do think it's going to shape up as a regrettable pause in what has otherwise been a really a tremendous 3 or 4 years of strong and steady growth. So let's walk through a couple of categories of the legislative activity that we were pushing for and against this year and monitoring. The first is one that Janet previewed, which was the red box on our scorecard, the renewable energy growth residential solar sector. So the pair of bills that were filed was really in response to what was the overwhelming popularity and strong demand for residential solar under renewable energy growth, which is Rhode Island's renewable tariff program. In the 2017 program year, about 6.5 megawatts were allocated to residential solar, and that capacity sold out in about 6 months. So there were 6 months before new megawatts would be made available. So the bill was filed. It was pretty modest. It was just going to allow up to 2 megawatts to be reallocated in future program years to try and ease that overdemand and respond to customers' real interest in going solar and doing rooftop solar under the program. It took a while for the bills to get some traction. Eventually, late in the session, the Senate did pass a substitute version, a sub-A version of the bill, but unfortunately it happened very late in the session and it was not taken up in the House. I think in large part, or in significant part, because the sub-A version of the Senate was a substantial broadening of the bill. The original bill was just 2 megawatts in either 2018 or 2019, but the language that the Senate passed late in the game would have allowed that flexibility all the way to the end of the program in 2029. So it was a change. It came late in the game, and unfortunately the clock ran out before the bills could be passed. Unfortunately, the failure to pass the bill is already starting to have negative ramifications. And in 2018, which we're now in the program year, the same 6.5 megawatts have now sold out in 4 months instead of 6 months. So Rhode Island customers will not have access to the REG program from now until early April of 2019. There will be some opportunity to do net meter systems, potentially with some grant funding from the REF, the Renewable Energy Fund. But the start, stop again nature is something that Rhode Island, it's a trend that Rhode Island's really going to have to buck in the coming years, and I expect it will be the subject of future legislative efforts next year. So, second category of bills I want to talk about, another item that Janet previewed at the beginning, renewable energy siting. This was a major topic of debate this session. In 2017, there were several bills filed, but after no action was taken, the Office of Energy Resources, OER, started convening stakeholders for regular working group meetings starting as far back as August of last year. Those meetings were held, broad group of diverse set of stakeholders all the way from last August up through the end of the session in June of 2018. And really, the bill you see here, 7793, was an outgrowth of the preliminary discussions of that siting stakeholder working group. It was, like I said, a very broad group, clean energy developers, land use conservation advocates, environmental advocates, municipal, not assessors, but town planners were a part of the discussion. And that group really had two priorities that they were trying to balance, and the legislation reflected this. It was simultaneously trying to accelerate renewable energy development, but also while protecting Rhode Island's obviously very precious natural resources. So the bill would have required every municipality in Rhode Island to adopt a renewable energy siting ordinance by July 1st of 2019, which would have been an amazing advance from what is now really a patchwork quilt of some ordinances that are de facto sort of prohibitions on solar development, solar or wind development. So it would have been a big step forward. OER would also have been charged with leading a stakeholder working group to develop model ordinances and citing guidance for those municipalities to use and learn from. And OER would also have conducted a sort of an evaluation of potential incentives to drive development towards the most optimal sites. Citing, obviously, generally a very controversial subject, but the bill itself actually was not controversial. No one signed up in opposition at its committee hearing back in the spring. Even the adversarial voices towards renewable energy thought it was a good idea to equip municipalities with more information to have them put an ordinance on their books that will actually give developers certainty about where is acceptable and preferable to develop projects in towns. Unfortunately, again, with this bill, it took a while to get traction. At long last, at literally the 11th hour, the second to last day of the session, the House finally passed the original version of the bill. Earlier that week, we had done a sign-on letter from our members asking them to push this bill forward, and the House did take that action. But unfortunately, the Senate didn't have time or didn't have the will to take it up in the final 24 hours of the session, and the clock expired. The other bill you see here, 8141, this was sort of a very surprising development that happened midstream during the advocacy for 7793. This was a really harmful forest siting bill that came in midstream, took a lot of the advocates by surprise because it came from one of the groups that was working in this stakeholder working group, sort of deviated from that measured, methodical process to sort of pursue what I view as a very blunt solution for a very multifaceted and nuanced challenge. And it basically said, no Rhode Island state funds shall be used for renewable energy systems on forested lands, which were defined as large tracts of contiguous forest. Unsurprisingly, the committee hearing was very contentious about this bill. I had the honor, or you might say the displeasure, of serving as the primary con testifier at that committee hearing. Thankfully, though, I really did have a small army of advocates behind me who were opposed to the bill, including just about every major environmental organization in Rhode Island, which was really great to see. They were obviously cited the concern that this bill singles out renewable energy to implement or impose, punitive siting rules, and didn't distinguish or make any attempt to distinguish between other types of generic commercial development. So I'm really grateful, put in a plug for a lot of our great environmental colleagues down in Rhode Island. Acadia Center, Nature Conservancy, Audubon Society, Conservation Law Foundation, People's Power and Light. There's some great advocates down there, and I think, if nothing else, that coalition will be really important going into 2019 as the subject comes back up. So I'm going to move on to, well, let me sort of finish that by saying, the 2018 chapter closed without taking any steps backwards, so it was a defensive win on 8141, even if we weren't able to push 7793 over the finish line. So finally, energy efficiency. This was sort of the third major category of bills that we followed in 2018. Rhode Island's obviously a national leader in energy efficiency. I think in recent years it's been a top 3 electric energy efficiency state according to ACEE. But unfortunately, 2018 was the second year in a row when the EU programs and budgets were the subject of legislative and budgetary threats. The first pair of bills, which I'll call the CAP bills, came on the heels of what in 2017 was a $12.5 million budgetary raid to the efficiency programs. These bills wouldn't have been a raid, but they would have capped future increases to the system benefits charge, much like New Hampshire, but this would have chosen the greater of a 2.5% annual increase, or sort of the rise in inflation. Our argument or our consternation over the bills was that Rhode Island statute for efficiency already is capped. Rhode Island can only procure as much energy efficiency as provides more economic and energy benefits to its customers than it costs. So that was really the subject of the advocacy campaign in opposition, and thankfully another broad coalition opposing these two bills prevented them from moving forward. The committee recommended them be held for no further action in April and May last year. So a defensive win, but a win nonetheless on those two bills. The second pair of bills we viewed as significantly less harmful than the first two. These are what I'll call the EE study bills. We didn't support them. We didn't think additional analysis and study of the efficiency programs was needed. Obviously, Rhode Island and other states' efficiency programs already undergo pretty heavy cost-effectiveness scrutiny at the utility, at the state, at the regional level. So we thought it would have been redundant and unnecessarily costly to layer on yet another layer of review and verification. That being said, we did not fiercely oppose the bills, as it did become clear that the bills were sort of gaining traction as a compromise between some of the stakeholders that were pushing the more harmful efficiency bills. And these bills gaining traction was seen as something that would take pressure off of the much more harmful energy efficiency cap legislation. So the final package that was agreed upon and signed by the governor is going to direct OER, Office of Energy Resources, to hire an independent consultant to perform evaluation of the state electricity and gas efficiency programs, the measured savings, the metering, the data collection methods and methodologies, and that's going to be under the guidance of a stakeholder working group, and will be filed to the legislature by next October of 2019, so we have some time. So while we didn't, fully support this, we do think we're expecting that the study is going to reveal what we hope, what we know and expect about the programs, which is that they're delivering substantial benefits and savings to a variety of customers. So I won't walk through this final slide in much detail. These were some of the other topics that were brought up, and bills were filed last year at net metering. It was the third session in a row that carbon pricing was raised, the Energize Rhode Island Act. There were efforts to implement some more legally binding Global Warming Solutions Act targets, compliance standards, and the Senate Commission. So looking ahead to 2019, we can expect that citing in the virtual net metering statute will be back and will be looked at again. We hope that there will be further efforts to unlock megawatt flexibility for the residential solar program under REG. Carbon pricing we expect will be back. And who knows, there may be some exciting proposals coming out of the power sector transformation and national grid rate case efforts. So I'll wrap up there and look forward to the Q&A afterwards. Thanks, everyone.
So I think we're going to wrap up with Olivia from Vermont, and hopefully leave about 15 minutes for your questions.
Well, good morning, and I will bring you, can you hear, everyone hear me okay? All right, I will bring you greetings from the Green Mountain State, where we have a commitment to 90% total renewable energy, and we have a renewable energy standard, which other states call RPS, because we've got to be a little different. That is, all right, this isn't quite, let's see, a little closer. Let's do this. Yeah, thank you. Where we have 75% renewable. Not on. I'm trying to make jokes. They're falling flat. You can't even hear me. Okay. On? Working? No. I'm gonna. All right. Okay. I just don't want to have a workout situation with the stress. Okay. So again, my name is Olivia Campbell Andersen, Renewable Energy Vermont. Bringing you greetings from the Green Mountain State. As I said, you may not have heard me when I was doing a little bragging, saying that where we're committed to 90% total renewable energy, hopefully sooner than 2050, and we do have on the books a 75% renewable energy standard, which is our RPS, by 2032. So thank you for trying to catch up, Massachusetts. Now. Well, we got some advantages we're not don't have any actual fossil fuel generators in our state. Oh, one very small oil facility. But, all right, moving on. So, Renewable Energy Vermont, we also work on total energy issues, thermal transportation, and electricity. There were 119 bills impacting the climate economy this year. And we also were in the second year of our biennium, meaning that any bills introduced in the year prior still and did not pass still could become live again this year. So of those 119 bills, this also was a legislative session in Vermont where climate and energy issues were not at the forefront. We had a Republican governor and a generally progressive dominated legislature, though not enough Democratic votes in the House to override vetoes. But the big issues of the session were around the budget, the Senate, and Natural Resources and Energy Committee spent a lot of time on clean water funding, education funding, guns, gun control, minimum wage, paid family leave. So it was sort of nice in some ways to not be the issue of the day, and somewhat of that was intentional. But there were some things that we wanted to move forward and that we were successful in moving forward. So this slide shows some of the positive legislative outcomes. Rev introduced a measure to secure advanced wood sales tax, sales tax exemption for advanced wood heating. We thought this was going to be a 2-year effort. This was sort of the bill that we would not give up on because it died 3 times and we kept inserting the measure back in. So we got it through for the next 3 years. And on a rural economic development bill, it's really important as you know, we have a lot of heating needs, so we need, with our climate pollution, to get more transition away from fossil fuels and have more high efficient advanced wood heating, have more heat pumps, have more geothermal. So this was a good thing for our forest economy as well. We also had another measure which we introduced, was sort of a comprehensive bill, House Bill 676, to deal with a myriad of you know, smaller technical issues, just some technical corrections, where we were successful in eliminating A&R fees for rooftop solar. We also removed the mandatory setback that was in state law, so that the setbacks originally designed to protect vistas and the scenic landscape would also not apply to parking lot canopies, because as we know, a lot of our parking lots are fairly close to the road. And so you wouldn't want to have, you know, eliminate essentially effectively with a setback potential for parking lot canopies. So we were successful in getting that through. This is all on House Bill 676. We also will continue to press the message. I like to think that in Vermont we've moved past the siting issues. So we were thankful a lot of the work that we have done around for the past couple of years on that. Siting in the legislature was an issue. But we continue to try to message the benefits of renewable energy with agriculture and with the rural economy. And so one of those benefits also, particularly with solar, you know, I encourage other states to look at this, is pollinator friendly solar vegetation management and site management. So so we now have a law in the books that creates a voluntary, very important, voluntary certification where there's criteria that you meet, and then you can say you've got a solar friendly site. So there's a lot of win-wins around that issue, and so there's now an official voluntary certification that is in state law. Creating new opportunities, House Bill 620 requires a feasibility study for renewable generation at airports in the state, and also for electric vehicle charging. And when we're talking about vehicles here, we are talking both about, yes, what we drive, but also what we fly, because we have a really exciting company in Vermont, Beta, who is providing electric aircraft charging and other resources. So we want to get ready for that at our state airports and make sure it's viable. The net metering has really been an issue that has rulemaking been addressed through the Public Utility Commission process, but there's always defense that's needed. I wish that I had I was really very hopeful for Kate's efforts in New Hampshire to expand the size of projects. We did a lot of work to defend maintaining the ability to net meter up to 500 kilowatts. Utilities have made it very clear that they would like to have net metering only go to 150 kilowatts. And so this is the 3rd year in a row where we have been very successful, and we actually had a little snippet on the Senate floor with this, but we've been very successful in defending up to 500 kilowatts net metering, and negative legislative action. So another great thing of success that we did this year was creating messaging around a climate package within the state budget. And some things that are very positive is the federal money that's coming from Volkswagen settlement funds. Through the budget, the legislature dedicated all of those funds to electric transportation. The governor, Agency of Natural Resources, governor had committed to doing the maximum 15% for electric vehicle charging. However, the draft plan that was released would have allowed the rest of the funds to be used for additional diesel. There is no such thing as clean diesel, don't say it, additional diesel. So we're excited that we got this through the legislature. So our first year Volkswagen settlement funds from the feds will be dedicated to electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure only. We also prevented a raid on the Clean Energy Development Fund, which was initiated by the governor. So we're thankful for that. We actually recovered, we were able to recover some funds that had been shifted in prior years. So that was a successful climate effort. And related to, there was also money allocated for a carbon pricing study. So we've had for a couple of years legislation around carbon pricing that's been introduced, and it's stalled, even not really even getting votes on committee. And so this year there was funding allocated in the budget to do an independent assessment that the Joint Fiscal Office actually has an RFP out for benefits of a state carbon pricing mechanism, and also what would be the benefits for Vermont joining regional carbon pricing, like the Western Climate Initiative or an expansion of RGGI, etc. So that was all positive things coming out of the budget this year. And let's see, we also, on energy storage and demand response, there's a new pilot through Efficiency Vermont that was authorized that will enable use of some energy efficiency funds for non-traditional energy efficiency services, such as energy storage and so forth. So that's a positive benefit. And there was a mini omnibus energy bill, House Bill 410, which was year 2 of the energy efficiency appliance standards, upping those so that, as we have seen on the federal level with the VAT roll on energy efficiency appliances, that can't happen. Plus, we are adding to them to make it a little above for certain appliances. So I think there were 16 or maybe 19 appliances were added to the non-efficiency standard. There was also within that bill utility integrated resource plans and the state transportation plan now have to be consistent with our 90% total renewable energy comprehensive energy plan. And so I think that is a very quiet thing that wasn't talked about, but a potentially really momentous thing moving forward, as well as consistent with the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so some of you may have heard recently we've got very strong greenhouse gas reduction goals. We're having a ton of time meeting them. And so this is a nice way, I think it's a little quiet thing that was in there, but it could have real meaningful impact moving forward with something you want to look to in other states as well. There's also some issues around electric vehicle parking and so forth. And lastly, we did spend time on hydroelectricity this year, and we were able to avoid some costly duplicative inspection, and there is a new regime for dams in Vermont. So if folks have questions. What's next? I already talked about carbon pricing. Also, what's next? Actually, what we fell short on is we were not able to get through reducing permitting for community solar and small wind. So we'll just have to come back to that for another day. We were not able to secure incentives, like a customer point of sale incentive for electric vehicles. Vermont is the only state, I believe, in New Hampshire, that doesn't have an incentive for personal electric vehicles. Some utilities offer incentives, but so we're gonna have to team up and work on this in Hampshire. But I think we're gonna get that next year. We're gonna be working on that next year. There is a comprehensive docket that's just gotten started at the Public Utility Commission around electric vehicles, and so we'll be working on that moving forward. Electric vehicle charging. How do we get more electric vehicles? What's the role of utilities in electric vehicles, both charging and beyond? So that's going to be a year or about a year plus effort at the PUC, and I expect some legislative activity on that next year. Given our success in renewable energy deployment, we are now having some challenges related to grid constraints, and there is actually an entire region of Vermont called the SHEI, SHEI, Sheffield Highgate interconnection area in northern Vermont, where we're receiving curtailment. Utility projects are being curtailed. And this is an area where there's great resource and potential for new renewable energy. So there's going to be a study coming out of that. We were successful in avoiding legislative action that would have prohibited new renewable interconnection in grid constrained areas and in the SHEI. So I'm counting that as a success because, and I think perhaps maybe other states in the future, we need to figure out how are we going to keep modernizing our grid so we can handle our continued success for the renewable energy that we need. Also next, a big thing that's coming is rate design and multi-year regulatory plans for our utilities, and how do they move beyond the traditional quality of service metrics into performance metrics. So a lot happening in Vermont. We've also got an election and coming up, a gubernatorial election, and we will next year have new leadership. We have quite a bit of retiring from the House, so we'll have new committee leadership. The Senate, the two committees where energy issues are in the Senate, those chairs now actually both have competitive elections, so it could get really interesting in the legislature. We'll see what happens next year. And I look forward to seeing you again in October at the REV conference, October 18th and 19th. Got a little shameless plug. It's wonderful to come to Burlington in the fall. So I've left some cards, and I will see you in October. We may also have a new public utility commissioner in 2019. So, because one of our commissioners will be up for appointment. Thank you.
Is this going to work for me? Okay. Yep. Thanks to all of you for all of our state coordinators. Really, we can't do what we do without you on the ground. And I am not going to say anything more because I want to give the folks here a chance to ask a few questions before we go to our usual thank yous. So, questions, anyone? Yes, over here.
Hi, quick question for Mike once again. Mike, does the RPS increase include only class 1 or is it for class 3 and stuff like that? That's number one. And question for Dan, the Clean Peak Standard has some language about storage being primarily charged from renewables. Any thought on what that incredibly vague language is?
The RPS increases class 1.
Just possible.
Jamie's going to answer.
Yeah.
Jamie's a technical expert. I'm just the eye candy on this.
Yeah, so Clean Peak Standard, we were fighting pretty hard to get standalone storage, so storage not necessarily directly co-located with renewables as part of the Clean Peak Standard. The language they landed on was the language the gentleman mentioned about being primarily used to store and discharge renewable energy. So between preliminarily that does not completely foreclose standalone storage from participating. There may be contractual methods to prove that that storage is actually timing its discharge with a totally remote renewable generator. So, but that's going to be the subject of the regulations and the rules that DOER develops to implement that program.
So is that done sort of on purpose as a compromise source to allow for a little more flexibility?
There may have been some purposeful ambiguity in that clause. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we've been told by the department, we've been told by the administration that they can make this language work for standalone. So we're going to be working with them to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll let Kate choose the question answer.
Question for Mike. Could you comment briefly on the status of the solicitation that was authorized in the 2017 legislation, and particularly whether you think there is no stone to qualify as at-risk members?
So folks who couldn't hear the question, it was about the solicitations in Connecticut, the zero carbon solicitations, and whether the millstone units will qualify.
Okay. The RFP came out 2 days ago. I believe there was an update to it that was added last night, which I haven't had a chance to look at. I think it was section 11, if memory serves me right. So it includes, it's the so-called, it came out of the millstone negotiations, the bill that passed in 2017. And your question is, do I think they will, the millstone will be included? The RFP changed, the draft RFP changed slightly to allow Pure to look at pre-2022 and perhaps consider them at risk. So I think the odds increase. Hard to tell whether it's really whether they are going to be considered. I think most people, other than those that are somehow involved with millstone, would consider them certainly not at risk for 2022.
Steve.
Yeah, just very quickly, I don't need a technical, but particularly in terms of Connecticut and its implications, there's a lawsuit that's going on to try to block the raid on both efficiency and renewables, and that wins. If we win that lawsuit, it would change the dynamic between regulatorily approved charges and funds versus legislatively, which prevent legislature from taking those funds, whether it's renewables or efficiency. And as you can tell, regionally, this has happened in a lot of places, and so that's something that may keep the future primary drive on that, getting the legal team together. So.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. It would mean that the legislators couldn't look at those funds that come from electricity and gas ratepayers' bills and rate them for state purposes. Yeah.
I just say desperate legislatures do desperate things, and that's certainly what they did last year. And it's not, it's not just clean energy; it's the so-called lockbox on transportation funds that somehow the box gets unlocked and money gets into the general fund. I mean, states are desperate for cash, and they tend to take the short-term, do the short-term fix and ignore the long-term money.
Did somebody over here on the left have a question? Or that's been resolved? Haskell?
I don't know if any of that's on this. This is a question for Dan or Jamie. On the MMRC, the language changed from the Senate bill to the final bill, and it was vague enough that they still could pass a demand charge to it in some people's minds. Other people's minds, there's no way to do it. How does it really read to you?
Actually, if I can take this one, I can have a conversation on this one. Basically, it says, yes, they can still impose a demand charge. It has to be a demand charge at system peak. So to borrow Senator Barrett's terms, it can't be a demand charge based on your own personal peak. It has to be a demand charge based on a system peak time and an identified period of time when that system peak usually occurs. So yes, demand charges are possible, but it drives towards coincident peak demand charges versus whenever you happen to occur peak.
Yeah, and the language does change from a sort of a restrictive framing. The original Senate language was "you shall not impose a demand charge unless," but the new language is EDCs may if. So it's more permissive in that sense.
So we'll fight this at the DPU. Somebody over here? Or Karen?
Thanks. Question for Dan and maybe one for Mike this time. I'm curious if you can give a shout out to Senator Barrett about carbon pricing. I mean, do you have a sense that there's much seriousness in the legislature to ever do anything about carbon pricing?
I'll tell you two stories. One is that the legislators are very serious about climate change, and they really want to do something about that. By the same token, and I may have told other people have heard this before, I was talking to a legislator who asked me, you know, when the whole 40 cents, or the whole $40 a ton was on for carbon pricing, what does that do to a gallon of gasoline? And I said, well, about 26 cents. But you get your money back under the bills that are there. And the guy said, stop right there. He said, I stopped listening after you said 26 cents. He said, we tried to put a 2 or 3 cent per gallon charge to do roads, and people overwhelmingly refused to repeal it. So he said, you may have great points, and we really need to do something on this, but the public's not ready. You know, the public said, we want to do something on climate change. The minute you say it's going to cost you something, they say no. So a lot of the House members, and House districts are 40,000 people, so they're very much closer than the Senate districts, which are 120, 130,000 people. So it's very difficult to get them to do something unless, you know, people lead. And so I think they're serious about wanting to do something in carbon sequestration. I think they're serious about wanting to do something. And the last day, a couple of people got up and floated the idea of a regime for transportation. So I think that there are things that can be done that don't take carbon pricing, that don't have that connotation. So I think that's where they're going. I think that's what they're going to try to do is kind of veer a little bit to the sort of middle of the road and try to do something.
So, one last question. Well, again, thanks to Peter. Oh, wait. Stop.
So we're talking about regime for transportation. What are the prospects for regime for transportation in each of the states going forward?
I think in order for us to meet our goals, we have to do something. I mean, transportation is the next area, and people are finally beginning to get serious about what we do with it. Some are small steps. You know, $15 million for charging stations is a small step towards EV, but we need to do far more than that. And so I think transportation is an area where people are seriously going to talk about this over the next few years. And if I could, Janet, a couple people said no when I said they didn't hear a lot on net metering. It's not that they didn't hear a lot on net metering, but it's kind of interesting. You know, last year I said there was net metering fatigue. Every 2 years, people come back and talk about next metering. And there's always something new on the block. It's offshore wind, batteries. There's always something that's new. I think now it's become background noise to a certain extent. So one of the things we need to do in Massachusetts, whether it's transportation, whether it's net metering, whether it's fuel cells, we need to go back in and we need to get back to basics and back to building blocks and make this and tell the story of why all of this is important.
Thank you all for being here today. We'll see you next year and hopefully have a greener scorecard, but we're making progress here. And again, thank you for your participation, thank you for your support, and thanks to this terrific team up here. I will announce our next event, our Emerging Trends Series, is going to be on September 25th. We're going to be talking about competitive wholesale electricity markets and clean energy, both grid scale and distributed, as we see more and more clean energy, and we hear a lot of controversy about how the competitive markets are working, how do we make sure that they work for clean energy. So I'm going to turn it back to Peter to say a few closing words.
Thank you, Janet, and to all of our state partners, coordinators, and to all of you. There's a ton of stuff going on. I'm not going to try to recap all of these discussions, but there's an awful lot that still is work that we're doing with you going forward. I heard a couple of things. You know, siting keeps coming up. There's a lot more to do there.
The climate transportation combination of things, actually I want to make a quick comment there because we've been doing a lot of work to grow our membership in the transportation area. We've got a number of vehicle charging companies, actually vehicle manufacturers we're talking to, hydrogen companies who are looking at both hydrogen vehicles and hydrogen infrastructure, and those who are looking to build out that infrastructure in collaboration with the states and the communities. So if any of you are doing work in that sector, please let us know because it's an area where there's going to be a lot of opportunity over the next couple of years to sort of set the models for how that kind of stuff can roll out. Offshore wind, there's a lot more going on there. The strategic electrification of both transportation and building thermal is a very important piece that's going to be going on. And then in addition to the net metering debates and all of that, and the energy efficiency modernization work that's going on, and RGGI extensions, there are a couple of just things that are outside of specific issues. We're hearing that we need to do more and more education. That means we're going to need to work with you on, because there's a lot of new legislators, there'll be new governors in some states, they need to understand how all of these different policies fit together. So it's not necessarily a choice of one or another. We need to continue to do our coalition work. I think we know we work with many other advocates and groups, mainstream business groups, environmental groups. It's so important to have us, as many of us as possible, on the same page to get stuff done. So if you're a member of other groups, let us know. That can help the kind of work that we do. And then what we didn't talk about today is a lot of the work that we do with the Public Utility Commission, where the grid mod work comes up. We have to balance all that work across legislative and regulatory, but that's also a place where we involve many of our member companies. So we have a full plate. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the next couple of months looking at priorities for the coming year, and we want your input on all of that. I want to thank the panel, and then I think we have one or two other events coming up. For October, there's two events that I want to make sure everyone knows about. One is what's that banner over there, Horizon 18. This is a brand new global clean economy solutions summit here in Boston. This is about how do we connect a lot of the folks here who have new solutions with customers, with partners for deployment. We're going to be looking at case studies and best practices with things like energy storage and microgrids and community scale projects and transportation and clean transportation planning. So talk to me or any of our team about involvement there. And then of course this is our 11th annual Green Tie Gala 2 weeks later on October 25th, also in Boston. Get your tables, bring your business partners, bring your collaborators. It's a great opportunity to grow relationships, celebrate a lot of the progress that we're making, and redouble our relationships so we can look ahead to a great new year. So with that, thanks for being here. Thanks to Jen and thanks to the whole panel. Great resource, great work. We'll keep working together.